there was an email that just said, once they got wind, you're not to talk about any case details outside of this unit, period. And that's just a clear violation of the law.
And the other gag order was an email directly to Joe after his email to the commissioner saying, no, don't send emails like that.
Wow.
Gary went to the Justice Department IG before he went to Congress, and he went to the IRS IG before he went to Congress. He did all that in private, internally.
You sent this letter to Chuck Grassley, Committee on the Judiciary, and he has responded today, not necessarily to you, but he's taking it up a higher level, which is awesome. But
yeah, well, just quickly, one other point about that is that right there where you are now, the ongoing retaliation. So the paragraph below that says as recently as January 2025. So that's a new protected disclosure to Congress by Gary saying, look, this is not appropriate what they are doing. This is a new issue, right? This is not appropriate. We've already reported it to the IG. We're now reporting it to Congress. Like, somebody, please make these people behave.
Yeah, and adjusting dates and things like that feels very inappropriate, to say the least. And you commented on that, right? This is the IRS management secretly backdated a request from SSA Shapley, so supervisory special agent, related to an ongoing operation, apparently to hide management's unusual delays and to create a false impression that his request was last minute. And I wrote right in my notes, I said, set up, because it feels like that. It feels like, they're trying to make him miserable. And it's been more than that. I think you mentioned elsewhere in here that he's scrutinized, he's isolated, new requirements to get approvals, can't even travel without, certain authorizations. Like, they're just making his life miserable because they're so mad that he made them exposed, essentially.
There are dozens
pages and pages of examples. Yeah, writing all this, what I was doing right before the call, writing all this stuff out, right? Because again, whether we're focusing more on it with OSC, whether we go to the Merit Systems Protection Board, the other agency that I came to power from, right? We have to lay all of that out, and it's voluminous. But again, you shouldn't have to lay all this out, again, to Congress and just say, look, this is a huge problem. Just, again, skip all the process. Let's just fix it.
But this makes the point we thought in a, sort of a, without getting into all the weeds, like, look, this is not kosher. You can't do that.
Yeah, and you want a functional department that isn't treating people like that who are doing their jobs. All right, so you said here, stop the retaliations. Over the last 2 years, Shapley and Ziegler have told the truth in the proper way, as is their duty. They withstood public scrutiny, and they're still suffering the consequences after having blown the whistle. And you say the system is utterly broken, and we'll see if it gets fixed, but right at the moment, it's the same old guard, I guess, is still in place right now.
It's not just the guard either. Again, I think this case really highlights that in a really big, OSC takes a long time. In a lot of cases, then it's not going to be a big thing. But here you've had the whole world watching, right? I mean, this high profile of a case, I think, just really illustrates this isn't a system that works, or at least not quickly in any way. And
it doesn't work timely enough to have any meaning.
Yeah, and I understand bureaucracy and delays, and I get that, but this whole thing felt like it was timed, very interestingly with the election. And now that there's a changing of the administration, maybe people are trying to cover things up. Maybe not in this domain, but certainly everywhere else, and probably this domain too. These public servants stand ready to serve. And you say, for decades, to Chuck Grassley, you have urged the President of the United States to hold a Rose Garden ceremony to honor and celebrate whistleblowers. Please consider asking this President, Trump, to go a step further and actually elevate whistleblowers who have demonstrated outstanding performance and integrity to positions of authority to help reform their agencies. And that is exciting. So what were you thinking that might lead to, or where should that go?
There are a number of positions that, for one, again, Senator Grassley's been a huge advocate for this. Jason and I, like you mentioned, worked together for Senator Grassley. This is something he's asked everyone to do. Imagine how powerful it would be if President Trump said, you know what, I'm going to put in charge of the IRS, the biggest whistleblower from the IRS ever. I'm going to put in charge of the ATF. Right. Jason and I first worked together on Operation Fast and Furious, Congress's investigation of that. I'm going to put the Pete Forcelli, a whistleblower, on that Operation Fast and Furious. I'm going to make him the head of the ATF. What a powerful thing to have people who have seen the problems in action and say, okay, you know where the bodies are buried, go fix this. You've blown the whistle, you've suffered the wrath and scorn of everyone else, you've suffered the consequences for that. Now you're in a position to go and fix it. And we knew Senator Grassley is someone that would innately understand what a powerful thing that could be.
And he did. I think he got the message a bit. So let me share this letter, which just came out today. It is from the United States Senate. You can see Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson. They just sent this today, and this one went over to the Honorable Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Says, all right, we've recently learned that the Office of the Special Counsel has confirmed that IRS Supervisory Special Agent Gary Shapley and IRS Special Agent Joseph Ziegler were illegally issued gag orders and retaliated against by the IRS under the Biden administration. And those gag orders were just basically they can't talk, or what were those specifically, that they can't go and testify in front of Congress?
They were emails, and didn't just go to them. It went to hundreds of thousands of employees. It went to everybody in their unit first. There was an email that just said, once they got wind, you're not to talk about any case details outside of this unit, period. And that's just a clear violation of the law. Whenever they do that, the law says they're supposed to say, except if you're going to blow the whistle to the IG or to Congress or right. The law says you have to tell them that if you tell them to keep their mouth shut.
And the other gag order was an email directly to Joe after his email to the commissioner saying, no, don't send emails like that.
Wow. So now being called out, right? They were illegally issued gag orders and confirmed by the special counsel, right? And now Chuck Grassley can now take that as cover and elevate that up to the president, and retaliated against by the IRS under the Biden administration. And I think we've talked about this, but the basically big one, I think, was a demotion, or they were trying to demote him or force a resignation.
Yeah, well, the one specifically here is that they removed them from the case that they had been working for.
Got it.
5, which is a substantial change in their work duties, right? And there was no legitimate reason for it other than, the retaliatory animus of David Weiss, because he was the one getting called out for pulling punches and taking a dive.
And maybe IRS leadership, once they learned Weiss doing that to Gary Shapley, made him go, well, I'm going to have to go blow the whistle further. I'm sure the IRS didn't like that either.
Grassley says these IRS whistleblowers made lawful protected disclosures about the IRS and the Justice Department playing politics by improperly pulling punches in the Hunter Biden tax case. Their whistleblowing exposed to the public that Attorney General Merrick Garland and his DOJ misled Congress and the public about the role that the Biden administration attorneys played in blocking charges against the president's son. Any thoughts on that paragraph?
Well, it's just a basic ethics thing. It's just plain as day, right? If you have an appointee of President Biden making a decision about whether to prosecute President Biden's son,
right,
that's a conflict of interest. And the Garland DOJ was pulling this snow job on the American public by saying, no. Weiss is making all the decisions. We're letting him make all the decisions. I'm not going to appoint him as special counsel, but just trust me, he's making all the decisions. Well, that's not how it works. There are rules in the Justice Department, and Weiss in Delaware can't bring charges in DC or California. It's just, you can't do that without those other U.S. attorneys who have the conflict of interest because the subject's daddy appointed them, right? You can't have them involved in the case. It's just a basic conflict of interest.
Remember the 3 buckets, right? So again, one of the buckets is Garland misleading Congress. One of them is what Jason's talking about, these conflicts of interest. And then to your point before about the storage unit, that's kind of the first bucket of the underlying investigation. In the underlying investigation was when Gary and Joe were told, no, you're going to interview people. You cannot ask about the big guy. You can't ask about 10% for the big guy. You can't issue subpoenas that would go to Joe Biden. We're not going to ask for his communications.
We're not going to get the location data to see if he really was sitting next to his daddy when he was texting the Chinese, right? So, I mean, it's
even before
everything that led to Biden was shut off.
Yeah, they changed names, right? They changed names like on search warrants, or they wouldn't use his name.
The name they had in there, Joe Biden, like political figure 1, and they said, no, just take that out.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so there's a lot there, obviously. And I guess to follow up on that we remember David Weiss was just a U.S. attorney. Then they elevated him to special counsel. Remind us what that trigger was that required that appointment?
The reason they did that was because they got exposed, this snow job they were doing on the American public where they were pretending that, oh no, Weiss can do whatever he wants. Well, our clients, when they went to Congress and they reported that, that's not true. They can't. And that's what Weiss told Gary in that October 7th meeting. That was his red line meeting. He was like, look, I can't do this. I don't have the power. Well, the attorney general's out there testifying to Congress that you do have the power. And so this was the belated, after all that came out and they had egg on their face, they're like, okay, well, I guess, if we're going to really charge this thing and we're not just going to pretend like we're going to charge it, I guess we got to make him a special counsel because that's the only way that he, a Delaware U.S. attorney, can bring charges in somebody else's district.
That was such a joke. And I can't believe that the media didn't pound that into the table. They just kind of ignored it. You got special counsel, and then they come out and they say, well, he's independent because he's a special counsel. He's not under control of the DOJ. He said he was just with the DOJ. He was the person investigating the case from the very beginning, right? You would imagine somebody external who has fresh set of eyes without all these conflicts of interest, but they just completely ignored that.
Right. That's what our clients called for. It's like, Weiss needs to be investigated. His office. And why were they being so friendly? I mean, obviously, right? It appears that they're being so friendly because of, it's a Delaware U.S. attorney. That's Biden country. That's where all, there's so many connections there.
And this is a good place to mention that shortly thereafter, after he's appointed as special counsel, Gary and Joe are saying there needs to be an investigation into all of this. DOJ responds by making him special counsel so no one would be investigating then. Congress says, we're going to ask questions about this. When Weiss does come up and says, well, I can't answer most of this because, now I'm a special counsel. We're still doing the prosecution. But I'll tell you all about it in my final report as special counsel. I have a tweet thread with like 30 examples of where he said, it'll be in the report. Good question. I'll answer that in the report relating to all of Joe and Gary's allegations. And then he finally released the report a couple weeks ago and he said, well, now that he's been pardoned, it doesn't matter. And he answers none of these things, none of the allegations against him. Again, going back to there should have been a special counsel from the outset to investigate these very serious allegations about David Weiss and his office's handling of this case.
Yeah. And in your letter, the one that we just switched from, you mentioned a couple times, this word accountability, I think is in there, or about, justice, or however you guys phrased it. But that is another question I have for you, is about the DOJ and We had the weaponization committee that Pam Bondi is going to be forming to look into this lawfare and a lot of the weaponization of all these departments. Any overlap on that or any insight on the, what that might look like?
Well, the weaponization working group memo that just came out from one of the first things Bondi did on day one is an excellent memo. And the very last point of it says, one of the things that they're supposed to review is retaliation against legitimate whistleblowers, right? And so, we're of course happy to see that. We have several FBI clients who are extremely happy to see that. But yeah, hopefully that the executive order, the related anti-weaponization executive order from the White House, it's part of that as well. It's all going to have a process that's going to feed up, and hopefully there'll be some actual accountability for people who did wrong. It will at least be reviewed, right, in a way, that's never got seen the light of day before. That's for sure.
Well, and that weaponization task force should look at David Weiss's conduct. DOJ has access to all of those emails, all those things that Congress couldn't get, that OSC has been unable to get. Like we said, they haven't been able to look at that. TIGTA, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, they have investigated the removal from the case, but can't issue any final finding because DOJ wouldn't cooperate with them. So DOJ
and the Justice Department IG. Gary went to the Justice Department IG before he went to Congress, and he went to the IRS IG before he went to Congress. He did all that in private internally, but the DOJ IG, because the Hunter Biden case was still open all those intervening years and only was recently closed and finalized with the pardon, only now under the DOJ IG's protocols can they actually start investigating. So you'll have the DOJ IG process, you'll have the weaponization working group process, presumably going side by side, and you'll continue to have congressional oversight, which the new administration should hopefully be much more responsive to than the previous one was.
I'm sure you guys have all the names of everybody who was involved in all of this, right? It's harder for us to keep track of this, but are you seeing the same exodus that we're seeing at the FBI, or the same panic? Like, these people know what might be coming down the pike? Are they still at the agencies? Are they leaving, retiring? What are we seeing?
They don't need to leave because they've still got their guy at the top, right?
Yeah.
So
there's no exodus
for now.
Yeah, for now. But
they all think that they're completely impervious to any of this political, winds blowing one direction or the other.
Really? That's an interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The IRS. Because the FBI's freaked, man. We have every day, there's videos of Andy McCabe coming out saying he said that they were terrified and stuff like that. And I'm thinking maybe that is
terrified of telling your boss what you did on the taxpayer's dime for the last 2 years. I mean, that's absurd. I noticed all the lawsuits about that are being filed in various places. They do a little rhetorical sleight of hand and they reframe the issue as, well, we don't want all this information exposed to the public. It's like, well, where did that come from? It was for internal DOJ review. Nobody ever said it was going to be made public. They're just like making that up to get something they can file in court. It's absurd.
Those lawsuits have been very interesting. One of them we read was talking about, First Amendment rights, like freedom of association. And the other one was talking about privacy rights and all sorts of stuff. It's like, man, they're grasping.
This is your job.
Yeah, this is
just answer what you've been doing in your job.
Fill out the form. The FBI AA, they were advising them to insert a disclaimer into one of those extra text boxes so that they could, I guess, not answer the questions, like invoke their right to remain silent or something. It's one of the strangest things. Are we going to need that same type of mechanism at the Treasury, at IRS, to clean this up? How do we do that?
One perspective is this, right? There have been lots of FBI whistleblowers, and we've represented a number of them. I've testified for the Weaponization Committee about a couple of them, or a couple of times about them. We've seen lots and lots of examples. Gary and Joe are really the only high-profile whistleblowers we've seen from the IRS. So I doubt we will see that kind of exodus unless and until some other leadership gets to the IRS. They send people out and start uncovering stuff, and maybe then you'll have other whistleblowers coming forward, right? Maybe then you'll learn more about other things. But by and large, the IRS has not been in the headlines in the same way. They historically have, and there's plenty of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you go back to, you read.
There's a reason for that.
Right.
The reason is the stakes are much higher, right? And it took a lot more chutzpah for these guys to blow the whistle, because inherently in everything they do is the tax confidentiality law, right? And we talked to you last time we were on your show about all the steps we had to go through to make sure that they were on the right side, and they didn't mess up and step in it and cause themselves problems. It's much harder for somebody in the IRS to blow the whistle. And now, given what's happened to Gary and Joe, unless they get some real vindication, no one else is ever going to risk it, what they risk, right?
Can I add some historical context, right? You go back and you read the Church Committee's report, right? A big chunk of it's about the FBI, but a big chunk of it's about the IRS. But they're kind of concurrently, these taxpayer privacy laws were there. And so it was always kind of this gray area. And so in the late 90s was when you had a bunch of whistleblowers during the Clinton administration going to Congress. And again, this issue kind of got raised, like, we're not sure we can talk to you or not. And so that's when Congress specifically added the whistleblower provision that we used and relied on. Congress said, we think you probably should have been protected all along. We're Congress, right? But we're going to explicitly say you can talk to us about these taxpayer private provisions. But still, people were nervous about that. And if you look back on the conservative targeting back in like 2013, that was just from conservative groups raising that. There wasn't a whistleblower inside who raised it because, again, you still ran a big risk. And so it's kind of crazy that, again, it's 25 years after that Congress put that provision in. We explicitly use that to say, okay, these guys are going to take this big jump. The stakes are high here. This involves the President of the United States. Congress has a right to know about how the public's been misled. And even then, again, as we've talked about before, Hunter Biden and his attorneys are still suing the IRS, claiming that we violated that provision, even despite all of this history. So this is why, again, you're a lot less likely to have whistleblowers from the IRS because this is what happens to you.
Yeah, and there's no massive unifying event like there was with the FBI in January 6 in the IRS or the Treasury Department that gives them kind of carte blanche to go try to identify 6,000 employees. This was a much smaller team, right? Probably a couple dozen people, maybe over the course of a couple years. And, to go and try to identify other malfeasance inside, I don't know. We just have a lot of excitement watching what's happening with USAID and the idea that, they may take this type of modality to other departments and kind of clean out a lot of the, the garbage that's been building up over the years is exciting. And I think that if we have people like Gary Shapley at the top or have some role in the process, that would be pretty amazing. And so let me go back to this letter. After blowing the whistle and at the Justice Department's direction, so DOJ and IRS implicated, the IRS removed the whistleblowers and their entire team from the Biden investigation they had worked diligently for 4 years. It's been 20 months since the whistleblowers sought relief through the normal administrative and legal processes. While there is now an official finding, which is thanks to you guys, that the IRS could not support its removal of the whistleblowers still face other types of ongoing retaliation every day at their job. This is unacceptable, and you have the power to put it to a stop today. Grassley says, we've been informed that the senior IRS management who refused to do their job, rolled over for political corruption at the DOJ, and targeted the whistleblowers are still in charge, right? And that's what you guys were just warning us. That's the current acting commissioner, right? We've been informed that these officials have not stopped the retaliation against Shapley and Ziegler, and the bureaucratic processes that are supposed to protect them are too slow and ineffective. So this is Grassley to Trump. He says, you must hold IRS leadership and the retaliators' feet to the fire. You must ensure that these brave whistleblowers no longer face retaliation, which would serve as a great step in restoring the public's trust in the fair and equal treatment of taxpayers that was so damaged by the blatant corruption and special treatment that provided protection and benefits to the Biden family. He finishes with Ron says, these brave public servants are ready to help reform and modernize the IRS. Your actions to protect them, to support them, and to hold the retaliators accountable will send a message to the entrenched bureaucratic interests that bravery, courage, expertise, and integrity will be rewarded and bad conduct will be punished. Signed, Chuck Grassley, Ron Johnson. And that is awesome, guys. So congratulations on getting that one in front of President Trump's eyeballs. That's pretty cool.
We also, Miranda Devine had a great article in the print edition of the New York Post this morning, which I am informed the president reads as well.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a powerful letter. I think that will carry some weight to President Trump from Chuck Grassley. He's obviously on the Judiciary Committee, and I think that would be a good development. Have you talked to those guys? Would they accept a position?
They're willing to serve any way that they can. I mean, obviously they, again, the key thing is this retaliation needs to end, but they're in it to serve the government, to serve the interests of transparency, accountability. They want to help.
They've been high performers their entire careers. I mean, Gary's worked on billion-dollar cases, recovered hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. He's worked on cases that recovered billions of dollars for the taxpayers, from folks who were hiding their money in overseas, Swiss bank accounts and things like that. Like, I mean, he's not your average, bureaucrat. They've been a top performer. He's been consistently promoted until this happened. He was running, it was essentially his idea to create this thing called the J5, which was like a collection of our international partners, to help catch these tax cheats, to work together with our international partners to do that. He's been a leader the entire time. What he did in stepping out at great personal risk to his own career to tell the truth, no matter who liked it or didn't like it. I mean, he knew he was going to be a political football. And we tried to make it a bipartisan thing and to do it directly, but given the issue that it was, you just knew everybody was going to see it through red and blue lenses. And he didn't want to be seen that way, but it was the right thing to do. And so it didn't matter. So he had to do the right thing. And like that kind of integrity and competence ought to be rewarded.
I think the likelihood of that may depend in part on the success of us defending against Hunter Biden's lawsuit against the IRS. Of course, we have our countersuit against Hunter Biden's attorneys. And last time we were on there, very graciously, we explained a lot of detail about that. This tax secrecy can't shroud misconduct. I think these two cases that we have will determine the fate of that.
I think it's brilliant. And we've seen this pattern emerge recently with Emil Bove and Todd Blanche, right? These were two former Trump defense attorneys who were there witnessing what the DOJ was doing to Trump and to people in his orbit. And now they're taking leadership roles at the DOJ because they know what happened, right? And I think that is just perfect because nobody knows it better than they do what was happening there, right? So they can root that out and I think fix the culture and just bring the agency back more towards a normal functioning Justice Department. So at the IRS, Treasury, I think that would be a very nice development to see these guys who were on the receiving end of this be able to get in there and reform it. But, they also are bringing in attorneys into these positions. Have you guys thought about that? Would you hop into a position?
I think the need for people on the outside protecting whistleblowers is far greater than anything else inside the administration.
We want to see it to the end and get them the justice that they deserve. And I think that the Bondi memo on the weaponization working group is an excellent start with all the DOJ stuff. And I think we need a similar kind of energy in terms of holding the IRS accountable too.
What does accountability look like when somebody gets pardoned, like Hunter? Are there still actions and methods of recourse that you can take?
Accountability, in the criminal process, right, it is what it is, right? You're an attorney, right? So that's pretty well prescribed. I think what there's much less of a public understanding of is what accountability for public officials is, right? They don't get charged. They're not tried by a jury of their peers, right? And so that's where we try to focus. And that starts with transparency. You can't have accountability with transparency because you've got to have people bringing the problems to light. And sometimes, in some cases, that's the only accountability there will be. Ideally, people should be fired. Sometimes there should be other consequences. But if nothing else, at least having the public know from A to Z what really happened, that's the biggest accountability that there often is. But, we certainly, part of accountability is also making sure that people who are wrong get made right. It's corrective action and then punishment for those who committed the wrongdoing.
Yeah, the problem is you had these two situations where when it came to J6 and the Justice Department, they were just slamming on the gas. They were all on gas, go, go, go. And then when it came to the president's son over at the IRS and that investigation, it was slamming on the brake, right? And there are people who are in the bureaucracy who are responsible for those decisions. Some of it may not even be misconduct, but just, allowing politics to infect the process in a way that it shouldn't. It might not technically be illegal, right? But it's wrong and it shouldn't happen. But if the only thing that happens to them is a couple of bad news articles and that they get name checked in, and then they go and they get a job at some big law firm and they're charging $1,200 an hour, and hey, all publicity is good publicity, and so folks on their side are going to hire them for big cases. Like, that's not a disincentive. What's the disincentive for the other side to not do it back in the other direction, right? So that's the fundamental problem that I see.
Yeah, and it's a lot of time and resources and expenses just to defend these guys and just to basically keep them at the status quo. And they're not going to get that time back. They're not going to get that money back. And if they just, they're not even getting an apology letter, it sounds like, from, what happened to them. It's just like a little email and a blurb like, we screwed up, and maybe they can get a promotion back. So, in the future, that feels very unjust. Meanwhile, everybody else gets to maybe sort of leech off the Hunter Biden pardon and get forgotten about as history continues, at rapid speed. I hope that does not happen. I think there should be a cultural shift that we're seeing in the FBI and other agencies in the IRS. And I'm glad that President Trump is going to get Chuck Grassley's letter on his desk, and hopefully he does something with Shapley and Ziegler. That'd be amazing.
Well, if that weaponization working group process goes forward, if you read that memo, it doesn't sound like those things are going to be forgotten about. And, they need to, these sort of two tracks. They need to get back on track of just, being law enforcement and being cops and stopping violent crime and focusing on the things that people actually care about, but there also needs to be a measure of accountability for the people who made those decisions to politicize it in the other direction before. And, so that there's some disincentive so that people think twice, including the people who are there now, right? You don't need to go overboard in the other direction, but that becomes banana republic stuff. If we're just ping ponging back and forth, depending on who won the last election, and then everybody else is investigating the other side,
right?
Like, there needs to be some, let's focus on what we're supposed to do instead of spending all this time chasing down grandmas, who were in DC on, on January 6th. Why don't we spend time putting, gangbangers in jail?
Yeah. And the internal corruption, and I love how you phrased it, how they hit the brakes and they push the gas. It was like the inverse of one another, right? January 6th was, as we're learning, it's like 6,000 FBI agents over the course of these years working on prosecuting these cases and, in my opinion, elevating charges that shouldn't have been elevated and so on. And on the back end, protecting the people in power, which is just a disgusting abuse on both ends. I'm very glad that you guys are working on it. What is next with Shapley and Ziegler? Is there further litigation? Is this kind of the end of the line here? What's next?
The next step in the defamation case is discovery, right? And we have a pending appeal in the Court of Appeals. They were denied the right to intervene in the Biden v. IRS case. We said, look, they have discovery rights there. Then they're going to be different if they're a party than if they're not a party. So we have that appeal coming up. So, our position is we shouldn't start discovery in the Biden v. IRS case until the Court of Appeals says whether or not they can intervene as parties. And then, in the defamation case, there's a pending motion to dismiss, but the way the court works, I guess, is that they go ahead and send out the standing order on discovery. So, I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means we don't know when the judge might rule on the motion to dismiss or whether he'll rule one way or the other. But, we can go ahead and start the process of discovery, confirm conferring with the other side and mapping that out and getting that going. And we'll
Awesome.
start to see what, we'll make our request to see Abby Lowell's emails and what reporters he was talking to, and we'll find out.
That's going to be great.